I now invite our first witnesses, Mr. Peter Erwin and Mr. Douglas Clark, to come forward. And if you would like to sit at the microphones. And thank you for coming. I'd just like to ask each of you your name and interest.
My name is Douglas Clark and I've been following the inquiry keenly since the beginning, putting in submissions. I do have quite extensive industry knowledge and I thought that that should be put forward to the inquiry.
Thank you.
My name is Peter Erwin. I've been in the industry about 17 years, from driving and doing network service providing.
And we also have a submission from you and other communications we're aware of at various times and points. But I would ask you to maybe speak for a few minutes and then we'll have some questions for you.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before your inquiry and to make some brief comments. I also speak for my colleague Peter Erwin. I have contributed much to the inquiry by way of submissions and supporting information, and in doing so I was able to draw on personal knowledge of taxi reforms in other countries. The process to reform must be just that, a process over time and according to a carefully planned and well understood set of concurrent changes. Good reform must not be hurried. That is the mistake that was made in all jurisdictions that I studied. There was a rush to reform and this inevitably led to considerable market disruption which caused politicians and regulators to panic. In most cases when market disruption occurred, Ireland and New Zealand are notable exceptions, there was a rush to revert to pre-reform conditions. Many jurisdictions returned to a fully regulated market. We can and we must learn from these failed ventures. Taxi reform must be treated as a process and not as an event. In my first submission, I laid out a plan for reform that touched on many matters and provided a suggested timing for each component of change to deliver a new business model by the year 2017. I think that proper reform can be introduced over a 4 or 5 year period. The precise time will only be known once the task is completed. However, we must start somewhere, and I have suggested that the Greater Melbourne Knowledge Test be onerous and should commence no later than the 1st of January 2013. This test will be critical to achieve our aim of having the best taxi service. I also believe that Bailey drivers must get 60% of the fare box from the same date. If we do not introduce this change soon, we will lose taxi drivers forever. Poor driver knowledge and the transient driver workforce have been identified as two significant problems in the taxi industry. However, we cannot expect drivers to make a significant effort so that they can pass the Greater Melbourne Knowledge Test if we do not provide increased monetary reward at the same time. Apart from geographic knowledge, all taxi drivers in the city and the country should undertake courses in customer service and have a full understanding of taxi cab regulations that apply to drivers. My colleague Peter Erwin and I have been famous for our Facebook wall jottings, but our more serious work has been done over very many months and has taken an enormous amount of time. We have been concerned not just with reform of the taxi industry, but with new and exciting challenges such as the statewide introduction of share ride systems, making point-to-point transport options affordable, appropriate, acceptable, reliable and innovative. In doing so, we've been careful to address matters like the transport needs of a rapidly ageing population, the imperative to minimise the potential ravages of social isolation, the pressing need to significantly improve taxi services for our large numbers of citizens living with disabilities, and we have identified legislative and regulatory changes which will enable us to find solutions to many of the barriers that stand in the way of true point-to-point transport reform. We believe that a range of new affordable and convenient point-to-point transport options will provide many positive benefits for the communities in Victoria. We are keen to deliver many such services at little or no cost to government. We acknowledge the assistance that we have received from various government departments, and we thank the inquiry staff for their encouragement during the course of the inquiry. Peter Erwin and I have completed much work on the idea of share ride systems, and we believe that this may provide significant additional work for existing taxis, and in particular for vans with seating capacities up to 11 passengers. We know that the introduction of such services will save government many millions of dollars in infrastructure costs and expensive subsidies which must be paid to provide scheduled route services. Some of these plans may assist in the short term to deal with the oversupply of taxis in the Greater Melbourne zone. This will benefit all owners, all operators and all taxi drivers. We are convinced that many of these services will be profitable and that others may need upfront funding that can be tapered to zero after the runs become more accepted by the travelling public. There may be some that will require ongoing government support, but at a far lesser level than that required by large vehicles operating as buses. We recommend that there be government-funded market research to identify where such services might be trialled and to precisely define the types and frequencies of services that will meet customer needs. We have exhaustively tested software which allows for variable route planning to collect passengers at their doors, advise them by SMS, a phone call to their landline or an email that their transport is a minute away and deliver them inexpensively to their drop-off points. This software can also handle taxi and PBO dispatch work, has full GPS capabilities including keeping GPS history for a year for every vehicle and capture all information required by the regulator. We see no reason why the new Taxi Services Commission should be denied access at high level to such information online and in real time. This is in accordance with our view that there should be a partnership between the new Taxi Services Commission, taxi drivers in the owner-driver model and the providers of these new share ride options. This will promote a team approach to everything we do and is quite different from the practices of the past where each worked in isolation. The GPS tracking for PBOs will give access to 12 months of tracking history. The problems that the inquiry apparently had in obtaining information from NSPs alerted us to the need to provide open access in the future to information for the Taxi Services Commission. To promote this team approach, taxi drivers have formed a new association, and this association has been incorporated and will soon deploy a new website with great functionality. This move will give taxi drivers bargaining power. For taxis and PBO drivers using the software, it's proposed that the in-vehicle hardware be owned by the driver. This is quite different from the arrangement we now have where the equipment is owned by the NSP and leased to the owner or operator of the taxi. We suggest that transparent charging be introduced and that a fee per booking system be adopted. We believe that the total cost for monthly depot fees, including the fees for each booking, would be just less than half that currently charged by the established NSPs. One of the most significant barriers to market reform overseas occurred because powerful NSPs with vested interests locked out new entrants by denying them access to their dispatch systems. We have ensured that this cannot happen anywhere in Victoria. We would like to see the introduction of our home safe bus idea, where we use vans to transport passengers going home late at night on the weekends. We suggest booking booths where intending passengers would have photographic ID scanned and then they would buy a ticket to ride with other identified passengers. This service would provide a service to the door and cost, say, $10.50 for a journey of up to 10 kilometres and $15.50 beyond that to a maximum distance of, say, 30 kilometres from the pickup point. This would provide work for those vans which would be used at other times for the share ride system and also for normal taxi work. We are both very keen to work to establish far more reliable taxi services for those living with disabilities, and we have met with large numbers of disabled folk and worked with them to begin to find enduring solutions to the many complaints unearthed during the inquiry. The disabled themselves have made a good start by registering an incorporated association titled Transit Solutions Victoria Incorporated, and they are developing plans to bring the community together to find and implement solutions for all of their transport needs: trains, trams, buses, taxis and share ride options. They are also working with manufacturers of mobility aids to ensure that wheelchairs and scooters have prominent colour-coded labels which say taxi compatible or non-taxi compatible. Peter has extensive knowledge about what services, and the group will liaise with the manufacturers of equipment about taxi regulations and things like approved tie-down points and other matters. There seems to have been no communication like this between the taxi industry and manufacturers of wheelchairs, scooters and other mobility aids. There are a number of matters which we would like to discuss with the inquiry before the final recommendations are delivered to government, and we would welcome the opportunity to meet to discuss some topics which concern us. These include suggestions for ensuring that the problems associated with the vertical integration of the Victorian taxi industry are dealt with. In closing, Peter and I thank the inquiry for allowing us to provide information throughout the inquiry process. We are happy to answer any questions which the inquiry may have about our submissions, any other input we have contributed during the inquiry, or indeed anything else that the panel would like to ask. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we also have your backup submission, and note your wish to talk about a few things in more detail at some point. Actually, maybe I could just ask a slightly general question which brings together some of the points you've already made and are in here. You see an important ride for shared rides, amongst other things. What actions do you see as being required by the government and by the regulator to help deliver on that vision, and are there any ways at the moment in which those things are getting in the way of the provision of shared services?
There are a number of things that concern us. Some we've discussed with your inquiry staff over the many months. One is the nexus between the Bus Safety Act, where we apparently in the past have limited taxis to 11 seats, perhaps to protect the bus business, I don't know. And we see some of these shared ride systems developing to the point where we might need more than 11 seats, still a manoeuvrable vehicle that can move around roundabouts and through chicanes in all these burgeoning estates around Melbourne, and still provide a door-to-door service. So the seating limitation of 11 seats is of concern, and we would like some thought to be given to that. To progress the idea of share ride systems, I believe that we need to commit fairly significant sums of money to targeted market research and to try and identify areas and then move into those areas and try and gauge from the residents of the areas what sort of services they would need, what they would support, and we need to firm up our ideas on what sort of pricing points people would be able to accommodate and afford to give those services support. Some of our ideas are things like sweeping through the estates in the Shire of Whittlesea, which we looked at last Sunday week, to the new South Morang station. And then people could pick up normal public transport systems from there. We also see cross-suburban services, because most of our public transport services in Melbourne are radially based, centred mainly on the City of Melbourne, and we believe that there's a lot of opportunity for transit systems that go across from suburbs to suburbs and don't bring people into that central area. We think there's great potential for that. In the country, we believe that runs of town systems might be a good idea, with say 2 PBOs starting, one in Lakes Entrance and one in Traralgon, each travelling in the opposite direction and picking people up and dropping them off, to keep the communities linked, to allow people to go to other towns to shop or to go to a medical appointment or whatever. And then the returning services would come back at an appropriate time and take people back the other way if they wanted a return service. We would also see those being timetabled to meet sprinter trains into Traralgon and the longer distance trains into Bairnsdale. So it's a linking service as well as a community service as well. Going on from that, we believe that government involvement is critical, and we also believe that if this work's going to be done by taxis and or PBOs, that the Taxi Services Commission should be involved from the outset, and that we plan these things together. One of the advantages we see with the PBOs with an in-taxi or in-vehicle piece of hardware is that hardware is able to be GPS tracked at all times, which is something that we're very keen to do, as your draft recommendations said. What we can say at this stage is that we believe that we can provide video conferencing between all of those vehicles in real time and live back to a dispatch centre or to a central security company, and that if a driver was in trouble, we believe that a driver should signal that he's in trouble very early so that the situation doesn't develop to a crisis, and that can then be, so a third person can appear in the vehicle and say what's happening in this taxi or what is the problem here. So that can be done. There is only one thing we're working on there. Technically it's simple. It's the question of the bandwidth and the cost, and we don't think that will be prohibitive, but we'll have an answer to that within a day or so. So does that answer the question on the shared rides? Yep.
Broad brush.
So the inquiry did say a lot of positive things about share ride in a draft report, and it's very encouraging to see the sort of ideas coming out that you've expressed. I think you've probably answered the main question that was on my mind in terms of barriers to the implementation of these sort of schemes, but it does seem to me that there's a real importance of having some mechanism to coordinate drivers, vehicles and so on in share rides. And is this something that you see coming from government, or is this something that can just spring up from the industry itself?
I strongly believe that there should be a much greater team effort between government and the industry in the future, and I think that's been lacking for decades. I see no reason why it shouldn't be a team effort. It's a people problem, and I think if we can encourage people to come onto the team, I think that will go well. In terms of the cost of doing it, the equipment to do it and all that, I don't believe government needs to be involved in that at all. I believe that these services will be profitable, and the only time that any significant government money may be required would be if the government wishes to put in a service or maintain a service that's not profitable, and then I believe that funding the government needs to make would be something like we have with our public transport system, but nowhere near as costly.
Okay, just a final question for me. We have to comment on transitional issues in our final report, and you did make reference to a period of a process of reform over 4 or 5 years, and you, I think, made the point that you saw the greater knowledge test and the 60-40 as being essential sort of starting points of that. Can you explain a little bit more the thinking that underlies that?
Certainly. Taxi drivers are extremely poorly paid, and that is the kernel of the problems we have. We cannot attract frontline service providers. We can't train them well because they're not going to stay, so what is the point in training them? There's no point making an investment. And once we put them out in the field, we pay them poorly and they're transient. That's become more the case in recent years as we've now relied on Indian and other students to drive our taxis. And I believe that we must remunerate our taxi drivers better, and if that means a fare increase, it means a fare increase. I understand the pressures that owners and operators are on, and that's partly because of the structural and systemic problems of the industry where there are too many mouths to feed. That's something that we're stuck with at present. Our industry's moved over 50 years from one where most taxis were driven by the owner of the licence to one where very few are. In terms of the training of drivers, I can understand that if we put a barrier up there, which is called the Greater Melbourne Knowledge Test, that drivers coming through the system might dwindle off to a trickle. That's something we're going to have to face, and I believe that if we introduce a 60% fare split from the day we introduce that, we may invite some drivers who are already qualified. We have 25,000 drivers with a DC. We can bring some of those back just by offering them some more money, and that will tend to get us over that hurdle as we move forward as part of the process. But I cannot stress too strongly that if we are not serious about a Greater Melbourne Knowledge Test, that test is not very onerous, we will end up with a taxi service that is no better than we have today. That is the barrier in London, and now I'm not proposing that we have a 4-year test like the fellows in London do, but that is the secret to their good taxi service, is their knowledge test, nothing else.
Have you any views on the advent of the GPS and other systems as, as a substitute for the test?
I believe that taxi drivers ought to be able to drive a taxi throughout Greater Melbourne without using a GPS at all. And in saying that, I qualify it slightly. All taxi drivers, I believe, should know where every suburb is. And along every major road, they should know every suburb. They ought to be able to name 5 suburbs near a nominated suburb. They should know where our major hospitals are, all our tourist destinations, all those sorts of things. They should have a fairly good working knowledge of how much the fare is from A to B in their head, just from experience. I don't expect them to know where the last little street is, but that's not an issue with our passengers. Passengers will show the driver the last little bit, but they want to know that he can get to the corner of Hyatt Road and Bluff Road in Sandringham. I live in South Yarra. I catch taxis and they don't know where that is. The knowledge test is critical, and the driver's website will carry the knowledge test on it, where drivers can practice online with right and wrong answers and multiple choice answers. If the Greater Melbourne Knowledge Test is not strong enough, the drivers may put in an even stronger test on their website as a higher qualification.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you for your submission and contribution today.
Thank you.
Thank you.